The Green Girl by Colubrina on Archive of Our Own. Chapter 5, Part 3. Did Blaise ask you? Daphne asked from her bed. When Hermione looked up from the rune's homework on her desk with obvious confusion on her face, the girl clarified. To go to Hogsmeade. Oh, yeah, Hermione said, going back to her homework. And you said... Daphne drew out. I said yes, Hermione said, carefully copying the diagrams from her book. What else would I have said? He was worried you might have been holding out for Draco to ask you, Daphne said. At least that's what he told Theo. I think, Hermione said, her voice clipped, that Draco already has someone to go shopping with and to buy candy for and to... Does your cat have to do that in front of us? Daphne cut her off with a shoulder as Crookshanks jumped up on Hermione's desk with a large spider in its mouth. Did you catch that all by yourself? Hermione cooed. You clever boy. Can't he catch a rat or something? Daphne demanded. Does it have to be spiders? Hermione laughed, but moved to block her friend's view of the offending spider. Well, Crooksy, my roommate wants you to go get her a rat. Can you find a rat in the castle? You sweet cat? Can you? Licking his chops, the cat bounced off and disappeared. If he does bring back a rat, what are we supposed to do with it? Daphne asked, and Hermione shrugged. Give it to the boys, I guess? None of them have a pet. Or use it in potions? Guess it depends if it's dead or alive. Hermione, Blaise, Daphne, and Theo walked to Hogsmeade the morning of Halloween. Draco, followed by Greg and Vincent, with Pansy on his arm, had beaten them out the door, sneering at Harry Potter as he waited to have his name checked against the list of students who had permission to visit the village. Not going, Potter, he snickered. Afraid of the Dementors? Hermione made a point of not glaring at their backs. So, she said loudly, where are we going first? I assume you want to go to the bookstore, Blaise said, and she grinned at him. We don't have to do that first. We have to sleep in the Great Hall? Hermione did not sound amused, and Professor Snape turned towards her. While I admit I find the idea as patently absurd as you do, Miss Granger, our esteemed headmaster has decided that it's the best way to protect you all from the murderous lunatic who seems to have snuck into the school, is to keep you all in one room, and I am not inclined to argue with him. The whole of Slytherin House trooped into the hall after their head of house and stared at the poofy, purple sleeping bag scattered on the stone floor with obvious dismay. What's going on? Daphne demanded as she pulled hers next to Theo and Hermione. It was Sirius Black, Pansy whispered. Peeves saw him. He slashed the portrait that was at the entrance of the Gryffindor common room when she wouldn't let him in. He's after Potter. That's awful, Hermione said, and Pansy looked at her. Since when were you a fan? I don't like him, Hermione said, slipping into her sleeping bag. It's still probably terrifying to have some lunatic after you. Merlin, Pansy. I can dislike someone and not want them dead. Whatever, Pansy said. I'm not a fan, Hermione insisted. She was still awake, fuming, when she overheard Dumbledore and Snape talking. She had been running through all the things that she could have said, should have said, to Pansy. 1 year, she thought. We can't even manage 1 year without everything being about Potter. And, his mother likes me. And fine, just go on to encourage him to constantly antagonize the teacher's pet, because he certainly qualifies as cunning. The only consultation was that he hadn't moved his sleeping bag to be near Pansy, but had stayed in a cluster with Greg and Vincent, and not her. Headmaster. It was Snape. Everything has been searched, and there's no sign of him. You're quite sure? I would be unlikely to miss Sirius Black, nor, despite my fervent desire to do so, have I cursed him and left him to rot somewhere. Snape's voice was low, but the contempt carried, and Hermione laid very still, all thoughts of Pansy gone from her mind. Well, I hardly expect him to linger, Dumbledore said with a sigh. I've spent the evening contemplating how he might have gotten in, but each theory is more outrageous than the last. You do recall, I assume, our conversation at the beginning of the term? Clearly. Dumbledore's tone was warning to stop talking, but Snape persisted. They were very close once. No one in the castle would have helped Sirius Black to enter. No one, not even Snape, would have continued the conversation at that point. Hermione burned to know who was the person in the castle close to Sirius Black, but with no more information forthcoming, she lay still and began to consider all the possibilities. Draco spent much of his time bemoaning his hurt arm and how he couldn't possibly play Quidditch. Hermione, sitting on the common room couch, passing arithmancy notes back and forth to Theo, said only, "If you'd taken a class that had actually challenged you instead of trying to game the system, you wouldn't have gotten hurt." Other than that, she refused to acknowledge his arm. His perpetual need to have things carried, or how Pansy poured his juice at every meal. "Professor Lupin is ill today, and I will be taking over his class." Professor Snape regarded the mixed Gryffindor and Slytherin Defense Against the Dark Arts class with his usual sneer. "In order to permit this, we will be combining your classes for the duration of his illness. I am sure you will all be quite capable of controlling your understandable adolescent rivalries. As Professor Lupin has not seen fit to leave any form of record of the material he's covered, nor anything approaching a lesson plan." Harry Potter came skipping through the door, mumbling, "Sorry I'm late," and Hermione looked from him to Snape, watching with glee the moment he realized it wasn't Professor Lupin he faced. "How good of you to join us, Mr. Potter. 10 points from Gryffindor for your tardiness." "Where's Professor Lupin?" Hermione sucked in her breath. No one spoke to Snape like that, especially not any of the Gryffindors. "If you had been here on time, you would have heard me say that he was ill. Now—" "But what's wrong with him?" Potter's voice was laced with accusation, as if he thought Snape might have poisoned the man himself. Hermione and Daphne exchanged, "Oh, he's going to get it now" looks. "Nothing that will kill him." The unfortunately was left unsaid, but hung in the room. 5 more points from Gryffindor for your cheek. Do not make me ask you to sit, or I will make it 50. The boy slid into his chair, glaring at the professor. "Now, if I might, with Mr. Potter's kind permission, begin the lesson, I would like for you all to turn to page 394. There was a brief pause, and Weasley muttered, "Figures with this skit we'd be back to taking notes. Lupin's the best defense teacher we've ever had. We've done redcaps and grindylows, and now it's back to reading about—" He was flipping through the pages, but Hermione had already gotten there. "Werewolves," she breathed, looking up at Snape. "Exactly, Miss Granger," he said. "Can anyone, besides Miss Granger, tell me how one might tell the difference between a werewolf and a true wolf?" "But we haven't done this yet," Parvati whined. "We're doing Hinky Punks." "I was unaware, Miss Patil, that you were both hard of hearing and illiterate. I am sure those burdens are a strain on your tiny little mind, and I'm truly sorry for your struggles." He didn't sound sorry at all. Perhaps someone capable of reading the text could inform Miss Patil how to recognize a werewolf. "The werewolf," Ron Weasley read, his voice laden with sarcasm, "differs from the true wolf in several small ways. First, I don't recall having seen your hand raised in the air, nor having called on you, Mr. Weasley." Snape glowered at the boy. "You asked, and I was answering," Ron muttered. "I don't see why you asked the question if you don't want someone to tell you the answer. It's just right there in the 5 points from Gryffindor for being insufferably rude," Snape said, "and a detention for speaking out of turn." The rest of the class was spent taking notes, while Snape stalked about the class between the desks. When the period was over, he said, 2 rolls of parchment on how to recognize and kill werewolves by Monday. Weasley, stay after class and see me about scheduling your detention." Hermione absolutely refused to go to the Gryffindor Hufflepuff Quidditch match. She huffed, and she pointed out the weather, and she complained, and Blaise and Greg didn't listen to a single word of her objections. "We aren't even playing," she wailed at last. And it's raining! It's Quidditch, Greg said. Thick face set in a stubborn expression as Blaze held out one of his extra jumpers. She glared at them both while she tugged on the extra layer. What else are you going to do? Blaze asked, handing her charmed pocket warmers to keep her hands warm. Homework? Some of your extra potion stuff? Well, yeah, she admitted. Snape has me chopping flobberworms into even slices. You have to freeze them and then keep them rigid, and then... You really wanted to chop flobberworms over going to a Quidditch match with me? Blaze looked mostly mocking, but also a little hurt, and Hermione quickly tucked her arm into his. Of course not, she said, and then sighed at a smirk. You are just so easy to manipulate, he had told her, and then dodged as she tried to kick him. But I'm glad you're coming, he added. The game was miserable. The weather was miserable. It was rainy and windy, and even huddled under a giant umbrella, and flanked by Greg and Blaze, Hermione was cold, wet, and unhappy. Could this get any more miserable? She muttered, and Blaze grinned. Potter could catch the snitch again. She laughed at that, but just huddled more tightly against his side, soaking in what warmth that she could. It seemed to be getting colder and colder. She felt so dreary sitting there in the rain, as though nothing could ever be good again. She couldn't even muster the energy to pick up her head and watch the game. What was the point? Blaze slumped next to her, his usual mischievous energy drained away, and Greg let the umbrella wobble in the rain, was sliding down the back of her neck. But she couldn't even care enough to move. Everything was cold and wet and awful, and everything always would be. She turned a dispirited eye on the field, expecting to see Potter catching the snitch in some unlikely and depressing way, because that's what always happened, and instead saw so many black-robed wraiths that she could barely see the field. Dementors, her brain whispered to her. You only feel this way because of Dementors. Funny, she thought, how knowing that didn't actually make the feelings go away. She just stared at the wraiths, mirrored in despair and apathy, until she saw Dumbledore run onto the field and cast something silvery. A Patronus, her brain said again. That's a Patronus. She wanted to learn how to do that, but got distracted. And the Dementors fell back, chased away by the shining light, and the water dripping on the back of her neck became annoying enough to grab the umbrella and hold it up tight again. You okay? She asked Greg, and he shook his head and muttered something. Blaze shivered and lowered his face into her hair and inhaled. Let's go back in, Blaze said. Looks like the game's over. Potter caught it again? She asked. But he snorted, and a tiny bit of happiness caught in her soul and began to spark. Looks like Hufflepuff won, and our fair hero is off to the infirmary again. It amazes me how that boy isn't dead yet, Hermione said, standing up, starting to pick her way down the stands. Give it time, Greg muttered. Hermione perched on a stool in Professor Snape's lab. Do you have a preference for what you'd like to start work on this week, Miss Granger? He asked. Wolfsbane, she said. Any reason why that particular potion? He asked, pulling a worn sheet of paper from the instructions from the top of the pile of the notes on a nearby shelf. Not really, she said, watching him. Very well, Miss Granger. Follow these instructions, and I shall critique the work when you have completed it. You don't plan to help me? Though this is generally considered a rather complex brewing task, I think you'll find it comparable to polyjuice, he said, and as her head shot up to look at him before he closed the door, he tipped his own head towards her. Miss Granger? Professor Snape, she said, just before the door shut, and he paused. Miss Granger? The Dementors, at the Quidditch match, she said the words in the rush. Why did they come? They were hungry, I expect. Snape looked at her as though she were stupid. They feed on happiness. On joy. Even that dreary, wet sporting probably seemed a feast to them. I'm sure you've done enough reading to have determined that, Miss Granger. Yes, she admitted. She could feel Professor Snape studying her as if he were weighing what he might say. There are defenses, he had said at last. Ways to fight them off. The charm is quite advanced. Well, beyond what a third-year student is capable of. The Patronus charm, she said, and he nodded. You have done your homework, Miss Granger. Well, I expect nothing less. Show me how to do it, she demanded, and he actually snorted. Do you really think that you, at 13, could manage to do a charm most adult wizards can't manage. You wouldn't have brought it up if you weren't considering showing me, she persisted, jaw thrust out stubbornly, and the black-clad man stared at her. Maybe another day, Miss Granger. For now, contemplate the proper preparation of wolfsbane and try to chop another batch of flubble worms. This time, I'd like to see you all get the slices the same width as it clearly requested you to do last time. If you can't even follow directions on how to cut worms, I fail to see how I'm supposed to help you learn to propel yet another monster. Hermione smiled, and picking up the potion instructions, began to read the lengthy, detailed ingredients list as Snape shut the door behind himself. Time passed. Hermione's flobberworm chopping became more and more exact, and soon the term was almost over. To everyone's delight, another Hogsmeade trip was announced for the last weekend of the term. Hermione didn't even wait for Draco to ask her. She'd been ignoring the way he and Pansy sat on the couches and did their Care for Magical Creatures reading together, but it wasn't quite impossible to ignore the way they held hands. Do you think he's kissed her? She asked Daphne glumly one night. She fished a box out of the bottom of her trunk and was holding it in her hand, weighing it. She hadn't taken the bracelet out at school, had never worn it publicly. Daphne watched her, and watched her shove the box back away without opening it. We can do our Christmas shopping together in Hogsmeade, the girl finally said, ignoring Hermione's question. Unless I can hint I want more of that muggle makeup. Makeup it is. What should I get for Blaze? Hermione asked. What's appropriate? A book about Quidditch? Daphne suggested, and Hermione sighed. Candy? Maybe candy, Hermione agreed. What are you getting, Theo? Daphne flushed. A tie tack, she said, and Hermione looked over at her. Isn't that... Does it mean your parents have... Daphne nodded. My mom said it was really too early for anything official, but the knots were part of a Sacred 28, and if you wanted to exude Death Eaters from the list of possible families, we'd have to look outside Slytherin, and, well, you know. Not really, Hermione admitted. Like they'd be okay with a Weasley, Daphne made a face. If they insisted on purebloods, there's always Neville, Hermione said, and at that Daphne threw a pillow at her. I am not dating Neville Longbottom. Not at all, not ever. Certainly not an understanding kind of dating. Yuck. Oh, come on, Hermione said, pushing away thoughts of how she wasn't a pureblood. Not even close. Thoughts about how no one would ever think that she was good enough for their precious pureblood boys. He's cute enough. If you're blind, Daphne said. And that grandmother, have you met her? I'd rather have Bellatrix Lestrange's family than that old bat. She paused. Now Blaze. Blaze is cute. Yeah, well, Blaze is getting candy from me, not a tie tack. They're all getting candy. She paused. Daph? Yeah? I'm really happy for you. Thanks. The girl ducked her head. I mean, it could all come to nothing. It's early, and these things fall apart all the time, but... Still, Hermione grinned at her friend. That's pretty cool that you two are openly... whatever you are. It was Pansy, of course, who overheard the gossip in Hogsmeade. The real news, she said, was almost breathlessly as they sprawled in front of the fire. Isn't that Sirius Black killed all those people, or even that he was Potter's parents' best friend, and that he betrayed them to the Dark Lord. The real news is that Potter didn't know any of the stuff about his parents and the black guy, and he had found out because he hid while teachers were talking and overheard them. You should have seen his face, she chortled. Wow. Hermione leaned against Blaze, who was holding her hand in a way that managed to look both defiant and tentative at the same time. What an awful way to find out. You're always so sympathetic to that rotter, Draco complained, wrapping his arm around Pansy. I'm not, Hermione said, looking angry. Just because I don't encourage your little obsession the way Pansy does, doesn't mean I'm all gooey for Potter. She's gooey for Blaze, Daphne said, a sly look on her face.